thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight as we wrap up Utah's 2021 legislative session. Joining us now live via Zoom is Connor Boyack, president of Libertas Institute, and Lauren Simpson, policy director for Alliance for a Better Utah. Thank you both for being with us tonight. It's good to see the both of you again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Rosie.
Connor, let's start with you. I want to talk about the pandemic first. How do you feel access and transparency was with this legislative session, which was unlike any other?
If anything, it was actually more helpful for citizen involvement to be able to remotely participate, to not have to drive up to the Capitol, figure out where things are at. Everyone's a master at Zoom now, and that's all these meetings were Zoom meetings. So you actually had more citizen participation. There was also a downside for legislators where there was so much participation and texting and emailing. It was very hard for legislators to sift through kind of the onslaught of noise, not that it's unhelpful from constituents, but to figure out from the specific stakeholders they needed to meet with or the key people that they were trying to interact with. It was hard for legislators because they were just getting overwhelmed with so many messages. You could argue that's a good thing, but it also made it a little more challenging for legislators to get the work done because they struggled to figure out how to deal with so many people engaging in new ways.
Lauren, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd echo what Connor said about improved access being a really positive thing for people to be able to directly participate in the legislative process, no matter what your zip code is or how far away from the Capitol you are. And I'm really hopeful that the legislature will keep these changes, these modifications allowing people to participate online, even when, next year, hopefully we're all back to a regular session again.
Lauren, in terms of bills related to the pandemic, there was the Endgame bill. Do you think the legislature did the right thing to set a date to eliminate the COVID-19 restrictions in early April? And after you answer, we'll hear from Connor.
I think that was a big mistake. And I acknowledge that we all want to get back to normal as soon as possible. We've all had a really hard year, and we're all tired of COVID. But I think in light of all the sacrifice, frankly, and all the suffering that Utahns have been through, it's such a mistake to try and legislate, something that should really be left to the public health department. We should let those people do their jobs because the last thing that we would want is to risk a fourth wave, when we're so close to a really well done vaccine rollout in the state.
Rosie, I guess where I would differ from Lauren is that nothing was arbitrarily legislated here. This bill had the public health department at the table. They were looking at the vaccination trends. They were looking at the reduction in cases. The data informed this bill. Frankly, we don't think the bill went far enough. It's nice to think in a month we won't have a mask mandate, but the bill does allow for the mandate to remain for kids in school, which is the least susceptible population, where we think that makes no sense to continue forcing the kids to be masked. And it also requires groups of over 50, which is, talk about arbitrary. A group of 49 is okay, but 51 is scientifically more, jeopardized to COVID. That doesn't make much sense. We think that people should mitigate their own risk. If people are worried, they can get vaccinated, they can stay home, they can distance. But we think it's past time for people to be treated like adults and allow them to enjoy their freedoms and go about their day as they please.
And that's why we love having more than one guest so that we can hear these differing perspectives. Connor, how do you feel about the legislature taking power from the executive branch to deal with emergencies? And after we hear from you, we'll hear from Lauren.
I guess I would maybe reframe that question. I don't think the legislature took any power. This is always a legislative power that was delegated decades ago to public health officials and to the executive branch to have these broad authorities to restrict people, restrict their movements, shut down businesses. When you see how the law was written decades ago, it is extremely permissive, but it was a legislative delegation of authority. So they were simply reclaiming some of their power back, restricting how and when these public officials could just with no accountability and unelected officials just issue these orders. It's only proper in our view that these officials, these executive orders come under the legislative power where the public can engage, where people can give input, where we can terminate these orders and not let them be open-ended. And so this was Senate Bill 195. And we think it was a very good move by the legislature to reassert its authority and make sure that there was enough oversight in the future when similar orders might be given.
Yeah, and I would say, to Connor's point, that, you know, the executive branch exists for a reason. Having an executive is a really good thing in a time of emergency to respond nimbly and quickly and efficiently to a public health crisis. Obviously, COVID has been going on for a long time. And there were a number of bills that addressed emergency powers in some ways. Some of them were really positive, adding transparency, you know, into the executive process. The bill that Connor mentioned specifically, I think is pretty damaging. It feels like a short-sighted, knee-jerk reaction from lawmakers who, unfortunately, over the past year, a trend that we've seen is some lawmakers have been more concerned about who gets to be in charge, who gets to drive the bus, than they have been about trying to keep Utah safe and protected and healthy during this crisis. So I think these power grab struggles don't really serve the people of Utah at all.
Connor and Lauren, hold that thought. We have to take a quick commercial break. But when we return, we'll talk about specific legislation that came through this session this year. Stay with us. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight as we look back at Utah's 2021 legislative session. We now continue our discussion with Connor Boyack, president of Libertas Institute, and Lauren Simpson, policy director for Alliance for a Better Utah. We pick up now where we left off. We'll start with you, Lauren. House Bill 60, the concealed carry bill. Now anyone in Utah can carry a handgun without a license, hidden from view. Where do you stand on this bill?
You know, as I listened to the committee discussions on this bill, the people who were most excited about permitless carry were members of a far-right armed militia group. And that's really scary to me. Public safety is an ecosystem, and the question we need to be asking is, will more guns in our society make us safer? And the answer is obviously no. If that were true, America would be the safest country in the world, and we're not. Instead, we're living through a gun violence crisis. So we really need our lawmakers to wake up to that.
Connor, let's hear from you. What did you think about this bill?
I guess I'll dispute the idea that the supporters were a far-right militia group. You could call the Founding Fathers a far-right militia group where there was a far higher prevalence of gun ownership and even use back in the day. We supported House Bill 60. We don't think a permission slip should be needed for the First Amendment, just like we feel like a permission slip shouldn't be needed for the Second Amendment. Let's treat adults like adults. That's what this bill does. The other states that have what's called permitless carry don't see any increase in crime. This is a speculative concern. The data doesn't bear it out. And so in the absence of any actual threat, adults should be able to exercise their Second Amendment right.
I want to turn now to House Bill 302. This was a bill that stayed in local headlines for quite some time. It's the bill that would bar transgender individuals from competing in women's high school sports. Let's start with Connor for this one. Where do you stand on this bill?
Our organization was neutral on this bill. It wasn't an issue that we've been involved in the past. I do feel like the debate really missed the point. The whole problem here, why are elected officials debating gender and sports? Well, it's because the government is involved in sports. Sports should be privatized. The government shouldn't be involved. We shouldn't have debates at the legislature about this issue. This is a matter that people should be able to just deal with in their own private sports associations. Now, this bill didn't advance fully, but it's going to be back, and this is going to be an issue that we're going to continue to debate, rightly or wrongly. But in our view, the ultimate solution is that let's just get government out of sports and let people do whatever they want.
Very interesting. Lauren, what do you think about HB 302?
Yeah, that was a terrible bill. We love trans kids. We love trans students. We love trans athletes. And, you know, trans students should be able to play sports with their friends. That shouldn't be that controversial. And, you know, we know some of the risks and challenges that these kids face. And we really wish that lawmakers would be focused on how can we help, how can we support our trans kids instead of how can we try and discriminate against them.
Another local bill that stayed in headlines for a long time towards the end of the session was that bill that talked about should the name of Dixie State University be changed. I want to turn to Lauren first for this question. What did you think about that bill?
Yeah, that bill was definitely a move in the right direction. You know, change is really hard, especially when it's your community that's being asked to change. But ultimately, you know, implications or associations with the Confederacy is something that's harmful to all of Utah. You know, that hurts students of color and it hurts white students. White supremacy is something that is harming all of us. And so I think it reflects really positively on Utah that the legislature has moved forward with this process to change the name.
Connor, let's hear from you. What do you think about this bill?
Maybe I'll play the same chord as from my last answer. The real problem here is that this is a public university created by the legislature. And so once again, we have elected officials debating something as silly as the name of an institution, which if it were privatized, if it were BYU or any private institution, they could figure it out on their own. There are a lot of strong feelings on this one, and they kind of kick the can a little bit to further the conversation. I think both sides really have some valid points here. At the end of the day, it's just a name. We should be far more interested in the actual quality of education being provided than the name of the institution. But people love to get up in arms over little things, and so here we are.
Oh, we always appreciate both of your insights so much on this show. All right, folks, you've been hearing from Connor Boyack at Libertas Institute, as well as Lauren Simpson at Alliance for a Better Utah. Thank you both for joining us tonight to share your insight. It was good to hear from the both of you.